I wanted to know if these tariffs were going to affect, or what the impact would be on the American economy. Because when we talk about trade partners, I feel like the European Union isn't one of those uh, trade blocks that we talk about, despite the fact that we do quite a lot of trade, quite a lot of cross-Atlantic trade with the European Union. So we're going to hear from two members of the European American Chamber of Commerce of Texas to hear how they think those 30% tariffs could impact the economy of the United States as well as the economy of Texas. I want to allow our viewers to understand exactly how trade between the European Union and the United States and other countries works. So, as we know, the European Union is made up of 27 independent countries, but there's something called the single market, and trade between all 27 member states and other countries are treated equally because of their membership in the Union. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. We have a long history of favorable trade policy toward Europe and the European Union. And in the past, that was country by country. But now we are really looking at the European Union as a whole. And when you're dealing in a single currency, it's almost as if there are no borders between the countries. The other distinction is, in the past, we used to consider the UK part of Europe, but now when I'm analyzing imports or exports coming from the European Union versus the UK, the policies are going to be completely different. Overall, the European Union is treated the same way from country to country, and the United States has historically had positive trade relations with the EU.
So now let's go ahead and get into the meat and bones of this interview. And I want to start actually at the national level, trade between the European Union and the United States. Now, the EU, when counted as one trade bloc, is actually America's largest trading partner, according to figures from 2024 from the Office of the U.S. Trade Representative. $976 billion worth of trade in goods between the U.S. and the EU. In what industries do you know of that the EU has a major presence in?
Certainly manufacturing is the largest for most new investment. As you said, the 2024 expenditures are huge for the EU into the United States. So you have not only goods, but you have services and an investment, foreign direct investment in the United States. So by region, Europe contributed the most new investment into the United States, almost $100 billion in 2024. And that's 64% of all new investment. And that is above Asia and Pacific, which is what many people think are our most important trading partners. But Europe overall really is the top and the most important trading partner for Texas as well.
We are now going to get into the origins of this latest trade dispute. As we looked at the data in preparation for this interview, we found the U.S. has an over $235 billion goods trade deficit with the European Union, and that grew nearly 13% compared to last year. So that means that the United States was importing more than it was exporting to the EU, correct?
That can be correct. You have to look at the size of the countries and the needs between the two. There's an enormous amount of import and export both directions, and energy combined with manufacturing is certainly energy, especially is what the EU has long worked with Texas on. And so that's very significant for our state. So I'm not sure of the exact figures both directions, but these trade agreements have been put in place many, many years ago and has benefited the United States. Even if there was a deficit in one direction or the other, it has always benefited the United States.
President Donald Trump seems to disagree. Earlier, before he became the president early this year, back in December, he sent a message on his Truth Social platform, quote, "I told the European Union that they must make up their tremendous deficit with the U.S. by the large-scale purchase of our oil and gas. Otherwise, it is tariffs all the way." And obviously we see now that he's putting his threat into place with the latest announcement of a 30% tariffs on the European Union. And I just want to get your perspectives as people who are experts in EU-US trade, EU-Texas trade. Are tariffs an effective way to balance out a trade deficit?
I believe, and the EU believes, that tariffs they will only lead to trade wars, and this hurts business. So many of these costs are, as you've seen in a lot of articles and clearly demonstrated, the costs will be passed on to consumers, and that is going to be difficult for business. So I can give you an example. In a couple of the states on the East Coast, there's a large investment, European investment in automotives. So same in Texas. And these companies, instead of just as in the past, they would maybe let employees go or make changes to manage something like these tariffs. In this case, they are telling their vendors in the United States, who are also many of them Europeans, that they're going to cut their buying, and they're not going to pay them as much. So those companies are actually closing, which is causing layoffs, causing businesses, to close, and that's unfortunate. So that's only one industry. Many industries will be affected, and I think the fallout will be a lot more difficult than people really understand. It's across the board.
And I think when you talk about a trade deficit, in many ways, it depends how you're framing the deficit, because in aerospace, for example, which is a huge industry in Texas, and we have multiple European aerospace companies here, we actually have a surplus. And it is not a small surplus. We have a huge surplus from exports from Texas of aerospace and aerospace equipment. So when you're looking at taxing components, parts, replacements, those kinds of things at a higher rate, you're actually hindering the US's own manufacturing.
Well, now let's talk a little bit about how the European Union has reacted so far. Earlier, a few days ago, the European Union delayed retaliatory tariffs to August 1st, and this was done in hopes of reaching an eventual trade deal with the United States. And then the following day, EU trade ministers said they were studying new countermeasures that could affect up to $84 billion in U.S. imports. Now, I want to get your perspective here. Who would you say has more leverage in this trade dispute? Which side has more to gain or lose?
Perhaps I'm biased because I'm working in international trade every day. But based on history and our current relations with the EU, I think that we have more to lose. I believe that we source a lot of equipment, a lot of components from the EU, and of course, food, gourmet food and wine. That's a huge import sector from the EU. The United States is going to start to feel that. We haven't really felt it yet, but now the tariffs are really rolling, and you'll start to see that trickle down. And even though the United States is a powerful player, it's not the only player, and the European Union will partner with other countries.
And that's exactly what's been going on. The European Union has invested so much into the United States and has felt for so long that the United States was their friend and ally, and they are basically reeling from what's going on. They're very shocked This is not something you do to your allies and your closest allies over so many years. And just for example, I know that state senators and people in Texas are very concerned about the tariffs and what's going on because they are afraid that this is going to hurt business in the state. And as I explained to them, they are right to be fearful because after, every time you go back and say, okay, we're having a deal, we're close to a deal, and then, oh no, we don't have a deal anymore, and now we're going to make it worse for you. Well, the EU is now talking very closely with Canada. They have made for energy. They are talking to Mexico for energy. And they are also talking, they just sealed a energy trade deal with the UK. So, between the United States and China, Europe has been hurt very dramatically. China has been dumping a lot into Europe and many other countries. And so that coupled with the war in Ukraine, energy, for businesses, they have bought a lot from Texas, they've bought a lot from the United States. And so this is shocking. And I think that they don't really have a choice. They're doing the best they can. They don't want to have a trade war with the United States. They're working very hard to get to this 10% and thought they were there until recently. And now they're not quite sure what to do. So they do have retaliatory options in to use. It's not something that they want to do at all.
I want to talk a little bit about this quote from the European Commission. They put out a statement responding to the announcement of those 30% tariffs on the EU. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen said, quote, "Few economies in the world match the European Union's level of openness and adherence to fair trading practices."
Yes, I think she makes a great point because the European Union and the United States have always been aligned as far as trade policy. For example, it is not legal to import products that are made with slave labor. We have certain standards for pharmaceuticals. We have standards for safety of flight and aircraft. When we're dealing with the European Union, we know what we're getting. But with other countries, we do not necessarily have those standards met. You might find that something is improperly marked or labeled, or you may find down the road that, oh, there was forced labor at one of the manufacturers. So we're moving out of that predictability that we have had with the EU for so long and reliability, and we're now into some pretty dangerous territory where we're going to be dealing with countries that don't see the world the way we do.
All right. Well, we are going to hear the second part of that interview after we return from our next break. Let's